When I bought the lakefront property just outside of Maple Ridge, I didn't expect it to come with an overzealous HOA president watching my every move like a hawk. I'd worked federal wildlife for over 13 years and spent most of that time enforcing conservation laws across several states. When I finally got some time to myself and the means to buy land with private access to the lake, I figured I'd found my sanctuary, a place to hunt ethically, fish in peace, and teach my nephew the same respect for nature that I had. But apparently, peace wasn't on the HOA's agenda. More specifically, her agenda. Her name was Beverly Hammond, a retired real estate agent with a short, clipped voice and a perpetual expression of disapproval carved into her face. She greeted me the day I moved in with a packet of HOA guidelines printed on thick ivory paper and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This community values quiet, orderly living, Mr. Rains," she'd said, tapping the edge of the folder like it was a Bible. "We've had problems before with, well, outdoorsmen, but I'm sure you'll be different." I should have known then. The property I purchased sat on 10 acres of mixed woodland, with a half-mile of lakefront. I'd spent most of my life in forests, deserts, and mountains, places most people wouldn't dare go without a map or a guide. I loved nature. I respected it. I didn't shoot for trophies, didn't bait animals, didn't hunt out of season. Everything I did was by the book. But Beverly didn't care about that. All she saw was a man in coma with a scoped rifle on his shoulder and a duck blind near his dock. The first real confrontation happened a few weeks after I moved in. It was just after dawn, and I was coming back from the tree line with a couple of mallards slung over my shoulder. Legal bag, tagged, all by the book. I heard the car before I saw it, a bright red Subaru, pulling into my driveway like it owned the place. Beverly stepped out in her lavender tracksuit, sunglasses perched like she was waiting to audition for a soap opera. "You can't do that here," she snapped, eyes locked on the ducks. "Morning to you too," I said, setting my gear down on the tailgate of my truck. "Yes, I can. It's private land. Hunting is legal, and I've got permits if you want to see them. This land falls under Maple Ridge HOA oversight," she said, pulling out a clipboard. "And our bylaws strictly prohibit the discharge of firearms within community bounds." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you familiar with Missouri State Statute 571.030, Section 3? The HOA can't override state or federal law." And Thesa, I gestured to the blind, the birds, the wide-open lake. "A is legal under both." She looked flustered, tapping her pen against her clipboard like she was going to summon legal team out of thin air. "I will be reporting this to the board." "You do that," I said, grabbing my ducks and heading inside. That was the beginning of what I now refer to as the Beverly Wars. Over the next month, she filed 5 formal complaints with the HOA. 1 for excessive visibility, whatever that means. 1 for aggressive display of dead animals, after I cleaned my catch in the backyard. And the most ridiculous unauthorized structure on HOA land, referring to a collapsible hunting blind I'd had for years. Each time I responded with citations, legal statutes, and reminders that my land wasn't subject to her power trips. Still, she kept escalating. Things hit a breaking point on a misty Thursday morning in late October. I was on my dock with my nephew, Jamie. He's 13 and just learning the ropes. I was walking him through the basics of waterfowl identification, watching a group of teal glide across the lake. He spotted them first. "Blue-winged?" he asked. "Good catch," I nodded. "But too far, and we're waiting for mallards." He nodded, excitement dancing in his eyes. That's when we heard up the crunch of tires on gravel. I turned around to see Beverly again, this time with her phone pressed to her ear. She was pacing near the edge of my property, eyes wide with theatrical panic. She saw us watching and pointed directly at me. "Yes, that's him. He has a gun, and he's teaching a child to shoot. I'm at 14 Ridgeview Lania, please hurry." She ended the call and smiled like a cat that had just pushed a vase off a shelf. "You just made a big mistake," I called out. "You did, Mr. Rains. That child is in danger," she said coldly. "I warned you." It was surreal. I wasn't even holding a gun. My shotgun was cased on the deck, unloaded. Jamie was sitting beside me, watching the ducks, learning. It was the most peaceful moment of the whole week, and now, thanks to Beverly, 911 had been called. I told Jamie to head inside and wait with my sister, who was visiting for the weekend. I stayed on the dock. 15 minutes later, two sheriff's deputies rolled in. I recognized them both as Deputy Graves and Deputy Loring. I'd worked with Graves before on a poaching case out in Iron County. He stepped out of the cruiser and looked at Beverly, who immediately began her show. "He's hunting with a child. There are guns and dead birds. This is a family community." Graves held up a hand and turned to me. "Rains, you hunting this morning?" "Sure was. Everything legal. Got permits in the truck if you need them." He nodded. "Mind if we check the firearm?" "Not at all," I said and led them to the dock. I opened the case, showed the unloaded shotgun, and handed over the license and permits. They looked them over, exchanged a glance, and turned back to Beverly. "Ma'am," Graves said, "everything checks out. Mr. Rains is a federal wildlife officer. He's not only within his rights to hunt on his property, but he's also trained to do it by the book." Beverly blinked like she'd just been slapped. "He's what?" I stepped forward. "United States Fish and Wildlife Service. 13 years. I enforce these laws for a living." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Graves continued, "There's no crime here. No danger to the child. The gun wasn't even loaded. Please don't call 911 unless there's a real emergency. You can't let him." "Yes, we can," Graves said, more firmly. "And you should be careful, ma'am. False reports are a misdemeanor." She looked like she might explode. "This isn't over." As she stomped back to her car and peeled off, Graves turned to me. "I remember hearing about her when I was covering this area last year. She tried to get a guy evicted for hanging a deer head in his garage." I chuckled. "Sounds like her." "Appreciate you being fair about this." He nodded. "You'd be surprised how many calls we get from hoes like this. Let us know if she tries anything else." I thought that would be the end of it, but Beverly wasn't finished. 2 days later, I came back from a supply run to find a notice taped to my front door. "Violation unauthorized hunting activity, $1,000 fine." She had the gall to fine me, but this time, she made a mistake. "You see, when you work federal wildlife, you also work with lawyers, land agencies, and conservation departments." I made one phone call to my contact at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Regional Office and explained the situation. 2 hours later, I had an official federal legal brief confirming my rights to hunt on the property, and that no local HOA had the authority to override federal land use laws regarding hunting and conservation. I printed 10 copies, then I emailed 5 to the HOA board, attached with video clips from my dock cameras showing Beverly trespassing to tape the notice. I also included a friendly reminder that interfering with lawful wildlife management was a punishable offense under certain federal statutes. The next HOA meeting, I attended, and I brought friends. Marcus Quinn from the Missouri Department of Conservation, my lawyer, Jamie, and Graves, off-duty but there to watch. I sat front row while Beverly stood at the podium, visibly sweating as she tried to justify her actions. The board looked uncomfortable. I let her rant for 5 minutes before calmly walking to the front, pulling out the brief, and reading aloud the section that stated any attempt to restrict hunting on private property by a governing body without legal cause could constitute unlawful interference. The room went silent. I finished my speech with, "I didn't move out here to fight with people, but I won't be intimidated, and I won't tolerate someone abusing their title. I follow the law. Maybe you should too." And then, without a word, I handed the board the documentation and walked out. What happened next? Let's just say Beverly's hold over the HOA began to crack. But the story didn't end there, because Beverly, in her infinite wisdom, wasn't done poking the bear, and what she did next nearly got her charged with a federal crime. I'd thought Beverly would retreat after the HOA meeting, and the silence from the board members had spoken volumes. But Beverly wasn't someone who accepted defeat easily, not when she believed she was protecting the values of the community. She saw herself as the last line of defense between the suburban dream and what she called wilderness chaos. In her mind, I was still the intruder, and in her mind, she was still winning. 2 weeks passed with no incidents. The air got colder, the lake started icing at the edges, and the ducks flew lower and tighter in formation. Jamie came by every weekend, bundled in layers, his enthusiasm undimmed by the chill. Then came the morning I found footprints in the snow on my dock. They weren't mine, they weren't Jamie's, and they certainly didn't belong to any deer or raccoon. They were boots, a small, narrow leading from the main trail through the woods to my dock. I followed them and found a small red flag staked into the soil just behind my blind. Attached to it was a laminated paper, "Potential safety hazard, HOA inspection needed." I stared at the note, stunned for a moment. She was now trying to inspect my land. Back at the house, I pulled up the footage from my trail cams. Sure enough, there was Beverly at 6:48 a.m., in a parka and boots, stomping across my land with a little measuring wheel, flagging my blind like she was surveying it for demolition. She'd been on my land for 11 minutes. No call, no warning, just bold, blatant trespassing. I knew I could have her arrested, but part of me wanted to know just how far she'd go. So I installed additional motion sensors around the perimeter of my property and re-angled my cameras for maximum coverage. Then I waited. 3 nights later, I got the ping, motion alert at 11:43 p.m. I accessed the feed remotely from my phone. The infrared image lit up like a scene from a horror movie. There she was again, Beverly, crouching like a cartoon villain near the tree line, holding what looked like a clipboard and a flashlight. I watched, dumbfounded, as she took photos of my shed, my truck, and even my recycling bins. That was it. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office and filed a trespassing report. I included video, timestamps, and the flag she'd left behind. Graves promised to investigate, and Loring dropped by the next afternoon to confirm everything. They took it seriously, especially after hearing she'd entered my land without permission more than once. I thought, finally, this has to be it. But Beverly wasn't done. Her final act would go down as the boldest, dumbest thing she'd ever attempted. 2 days before Christmas, I got home from work and found a notice stuck in the snow in front of my garage. Saw firearm activity or face legal eviction. Beneath that was a second paper, a printed document marked temporary emergency HOA regulation with Beverly's signature and an obviously fake seal that looked like it came from a kid's art project. I laughed out loud. Then I noticed the garage door. It was open, not wide open, but cracked by about 6 inches. And I never leave my garage door open. My gut clenched. I drew my sidearm, a standard lock, holstered on my HOA, and approached carefully. I swept the garage, flipped on the lights, and checked every corner. No one was inside, but someone had been. There were boot prints on the concrete light, clean, but visible. And on my workbench, my game cameras had been tampered with. One was unplugged, another was missing an SD card. And then I saw it, a smear of red lipstick just a little on the doorframe. The same color Beverly always wore. She had broken into my garage. I stood there, heart pounding, caught between disbelief and rage. The sheer audacity of it, the stupidity of it. She'd committed felony trespassing and maybe even attempted theft on federal property used for wildlife enforcement, and she had no idea what she'd triggered. See, I hadn't just installed trail cams and motion sensors. After her last stunt, I'd installed a small, low-profile surveillance alarm system tied to a federal wildlife evidence program. The motion detector inside the garage had logged an intrusion at 2:17 a.m., and it had triggered an automated alert. Within minutes of checking the logs, I received a call from a regional supervisor in St. Louis. They were ready to dispatch a wildlife investigator. This wasn't just about trespassing anymore. She had tampered with government property used for animal tagging and conservation monitoring. I gave them everything: video evidence, timestamps, and photographs. The next day, a plainclothes wildlife investigator named Agent Burke drove in from the regional office. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had little patience for HOA nonsense. "I've dealt with poachers, smugglers, and traffickers," Burke told me over coffee at my kitchen table, "but I've never had to investigate a rogue HOA president. This'll be fun." Together, we reviewed all the footage. Beverly entering the garage, Beverly handling the cameras, Beverly planting flags. She was building a case against me, one that was going to collapse like a house of cards. 2 days later, on Christmas Eve, the Sheriff's Department and Federal Wildlife Service both showed up at Beverly's door. The look on her face, as described to me later by Deputy Loring, was equal parts terror and indignation. She tried to claim she was performing an inspection and that she had legal oversight of the neighborhood, but when asked why she entered my garage without a warrant or permission, she had no answer. She was arrested on the spot for criminal trespass, unlawful entry, and interference with a federal wildlife investigation. The fallout was immediate and glorious. News spread fast. I didn't even have to speak at the next home meeting. Half the community was already gathered by the time I walked in. Beverly's arrest had gone public, and every resident who'd ever been fined, bullied, or inspected by her had something to say. Apparently, she'd issued over 70 fines in the past 2 years, many of them without board approval. One family had been cited for improper window treatments, another for a trampoline. The board held an emergency vote. Beverly was unanimously removed from her position as HOA president. The remaining members apologized to me directly and voted to revise the HOA bylaws to limit presidential authority and require board approval for all enforcement actions. Beverly was fined, banned from holding any HOA leadership role again, and placed on probation. The trespassing and interference charges stuck. She avoided jail by pleading down to community service, but her reputation was done. As for me, life went back to peaceful. Jamie and I resumed our weekend hunts. I finished building the duck blind properly and now with the plaque that read, "Legally protected by U.S. Fish and Wildlife." Just for fun, neighbors started stopping by to talk, to thank me, to ask for help understanding local wildlife regulations. I even got invited to speak at a community PCA where I explained the basics of hunting law, conservation, and how to identify migratory birds. Turned out, most folks didn't mind hunters, so they just hated being bullied. And Beverly, she moved out the next spring, sold her house quietly and disappeared. Rumor was she tried to run for the board as a retirement community across town, but someone found the news article about her arrest. That was the end of that. So yeah, Beverly thought she could control everything. She thought she could fine, trespass, and intimidate her way through anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of a proper community. What she didn't realize was that she'd picked a fight with someone trained to track, investigate, and take down people who really break the law. She thought she was dealing with just another hunter. She didn't know she was dealing with a federal wildlife officer. And in the end, the only thing she managed to catch was a criminal record.